the purpose of the meeting is to go through the MetaDefender Core APIs, right? So first, you can see those APIs are documented here on the user guide. What we're looking at, most importantly, is the ones that help you scan files, right? Yes. Now, what you can do is go on this 8.2, where you can download the Postman collection. Postman is an application that you can use to emulate open this URL, go to Postman after you install, and you can just import from the URL the entire collection here. And after you import the collection, you would see the list here. I'm not going to do this now, but you would have more. Actually, let's do this now. Okay, if I click on this one, I just need to copy the URL here. I'm just going to import, put the link here, hit continue, and see the collection is here. I'm going to import. I will have the collection here. So this collection is actually the API calls pre-built. So you only need to change it with your own data. This is the one that's interesting for us analyzes. So we're looking at to analyze a file, get the scan results, and download the sanitized version of the file.
Right.
I already have them here. So
this Postman, we need to integrate with the original application, whatever the application web application.
No. So
this is just for testing.
It's just for testing. Let me just go and show you this. So this is how, like an overview of the workflow would look like. You have the website where people upload files.
Right.
And the website, this is the front end, right? This is what the UI that the users see. Usually the front end has a backend. So all the code that runs the website, right? Now, whenever someone uploads a file, the file on the front end calls the backend saying, okay, we have a file. The file goes in a queue that belongs to the backend, and then the backend will call the MetaDefender core system. Now, in our example, you can consider Postman as the backend.
Backend, correct, yeah.
So Postman is just to kind of like simulate the API calls coming from the third-party application that we would be integrating with.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it's clear now.
Right, and then we have the MetaDefender core system here, and we have the database where the files will go after they being scanned and sanitized, right? We're not going to do this step because, it's just irrelevant for us, and it's just out of scope for this. So we're focusing on those three steps here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we assume we have a file that's being uploaded, then our first step for us would be to send the file for scanning, right? How do we do that? Well, we do that by, so I have a local MetaDefender core here. This is my MetaDefender core here. See, this is the URL. And if I want to send the file, I need to use a method. So API uses HTTP methods, right? To send the file, you would use a post method, right? And this is documented here on the user guide. So if I go to say processing a file, see on the user guide, it says method to use post URL. It's the MetaDefender core URL /file. And this is what I have here. It's a MetaDefender core URL /file and a post method, right? Now, if we look at the header parameters that are required, right? None of them is actually required, so I can go without any headers, right? The headers are information that you send along with the file upload. Headers can be the API key, so you can authenticate. It can be the name of the file. You don't have to send those, right? But depending on the configuration of the MetaDefender core, you might have to, I don't know, select a specific rule. And let's do that. So I have a couple of workflow policies here. And let's just say I want to use the workflow that's called deep CDR. Say if this is lower here, if I don't send any header saying, okay, I want to use this rule, it's going to use the first one that's available, most likely Yara, right? So in order to avoid this, I would say, okay, let's see, what do I need to add here as a header?
Workflow.
It says this is deprecated, say user rule. So I would just say, okay, I need to add a header. The header key value is rule, and the value would be deep CDR. Right? And let's also say I want to add a name for this file. Say this is the name of the file, right? So this is where I am sending the file now. I'm also sending this information, the name of the file and what rule I want to use on MetaDefender core.
So here the rule file name is really required, or shall I skip this file?
If you don't send the file name, let's do this, right? Let's just not send the file name with the file. So just select the rule, right? So you see the difference. But now we have to add the file, right? Because now we didn't add the file. We just say, okay, I want to send the file here. I want to use this rule. But where do we add the file in this request? The file goes here in the body. So you need to select binary. Okay. The reason why you select binary is because we need to add the file as the payload of this request. So you just select binary, and here you have a button that selects the file, allows you to select the file. So let's go and say, okay, I want to select this file. All right, so now I have this complete. What I do is go and hit send. Before I hit send, let's just go to the processing history here. Okay, this is my last
scanning. Yep.
Scanning, and if I hit send here, I get a 200 OK status and the data ID. Right? If we're going back to this one, when I send the file, a data ID is sent back, and I use the data ID to look at the multi-scanning and data sanitization results. Right? Now, this data ID is unique, right? Think of the data ID like the ID of this session. If I send the same file again, I will receive a different data ID, right? See here. Yes. If I switch to MetaDefender Core and I refresh, I should see two scans, but there's no file name because I didn't add
the file name
here. Yes. If I just add file name and I put everything, whatever I want here. Now, usually, this is a variable. When an integration happens, the backend code takes the file name from the file upload and just adds it here. Okay. If I do this, I get a new data ID and the file name appears, right? And I'm using the correct rule. If I say, okay, I disable this rule, so I let MetaDefender Core decide what rule I use. And if I refresh, it's using a different rule. The first one I have in the list, right?
Right, correct, yeah, got it.
So let's just go back and select this and do this once again. So I have the data ID. What I need to do is to copy this data ID. And so I did upload the file. Now what I need to do is to check the scan results. To check the scan results, you need to do another thing. It's this one, to look at the processing result.
Processing result, yeah.
Now, there's different ways of doing that. We're just doing polling, right? There is another way using webhooks. So essentially, when you upload the file, you say, okay, let let MetaDefender Core notify on a URL that you define when the scanning is finished. This is a kind of like a newer feature. It's been added in the last, I don't know, 2 months or so. But we're doing this manual check, and you see what we need to do here is to use a get method. So get, because I want to get something from MetaDefender Core. The URL where I need to do this is the MetaDefender Core URL /file/ the data ID. Right. So
then file.
This is what I do here. I'm using a get method, same endpoint.
So now, as we know, data ID randomly it will change.
Sorry?
Yeah.
This is the data ID.
As we know that file name is fine, but that, the data ID always it will be changed based on the file.
Yes. File name is not unique.
So how actually it will be randomly identified as the data?
So because file name is not unique, we have to rely on a unique value, which is the data ID, in order to get this result. Now here you don't need any headers.
Yeah.
What you need to do is just get, call this endpoint, and hit send. I get a 200 status, and I get this information in JSON format. So here you get all the information you see on the UI here. If I go to the MetaDefender Core user interface, this is the file. Everything you see here, you see also in this JSON.
Yeah.
So display name,
Yeah.
Right. File size, file type description, file size, file type description, hashes. Everything you have on the UI, you also have here. You might have more information in the JSON than you have in the UI, and that's just how it should be, right? So processing info, blocked reason says infected. So what's very important here is to look for some parameters, right? And this is actually explained in the user guide. It gives you an example of how this should look like, and then it is the description for every single parameter here, right?
Yeah. So when I'm sending another new file, so what about my data ID? I need to change the data ID every time, or is it just automatic identify the data ID and provide me the result?
MetaDefender Core will generate automatically a new data ID. You just need to use the data ID to get the scan results.
But every time to use that data ID, is there any way to automatic the data ID should be get the result automatic?
Yeah, it's automated in production, right? The code of the backend receives this, and it's using the data ID in the next API call to get the results of the file.
Mm-hmm. Okay, meantime, can you put one new file, please? Just I want to check if there is any way to check automatic data ID without changing any configuration.
Yeah, I'll just do this. It's a new one.
Okay.
If I do this, it's another one. But I need to get this and replace it here if I want to see the results. Now it's going to be the same results because it's the same file, but
Yep.
The important thing to mention here, to the key takeaway is data ID is the unique identifier for this scan session that I initiate.
Yeah. No, that's correct. Understood. Because data ID definitely we need that collecting the result or check the result.
Yeah. So imagine a situation where you have two files with the same name, right? Test.txt.
Correct.
You won't be. There's no relevance to get to the scan results based on file name because you don't know what file you're looking at.
That's right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Data ID is a way of doing that. Obviously, you can also do a scan, checks the scan result based on the file hash.
Yes, that's right.
Which again, right? It's a unique identifier, but it's easier just using data ID, because based on file hash, you need to see what the hash is first with your backend configuration, and then it's just more work involved. So usually customers go for this option.
Okay.
Right.
And how, like, in a upload scenario, in a web application scenario, backend, like if 50 users, they're uploading the files,
Yeah.
how I'll see that, okay, so and so users, actually, how to get the user identity, and second is the file result, all the file results for today's file result. How many files scan, how many files infected, and who are the users? Is there any way can I get it?
So for MetaDefender Core, there's no user concept, right? Because
Correct.
MetaDefender Core only works with file scanning. So files for MetaDefender Core will only come from the backend, because
Yes.
the backend is the component that sends file for scanning.
Yes.
Front end would most likely not know who are the files, because it's a public service. Anyone can upload files without authenticating.
Right. Right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
So, if it's government, well, you might know who the user is if it's like the bank application, right, where they need to log in. But sometimes you don't really know who the users are.
Yes.
Obviously, they can make some cross references and post processing
But
on
yeah.
seeing who's the user who uploaded that file, but you can't do that from MetaDefender Core, because MetaDefender Core
Yeah.
interacts
Yeah.
with
Have in
the backend only.
backend only. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
And obviously, on MetaDefender Core, you can run statistics on how many files have been scanned today, what's the scan result, and so on. You can do that from the processing history of MetaDefender Core.
For yeah. Okay.
Okay. So now in this JSON, there's a couple of things that are important, right? So this block of information, process info, it says, right, it says actions run, sanitize. So this only appears if you're using sanitization on that workflow. So
Yep.
it says it has sanitized the file. This is the extension of the file that has been converted to. It says it has been sanitized successfully. And those are the sanitization details. It's what you also see here. So let me just, okay, let's see if this is, come on. Okay, it's what you see here,
Yep.
right? This is here, same details, right?
Yeah.
It says what profile have you used, so what workflow rule, the result, right? It's blocked. And then the scan result is for the AV detection. So this one, the process info, is more for data sanitization or DLP. This one is for AV. It says process percentage. So this is very important, right? You should not check the results unless this is 100%. If it's 90%, the scanning has not finished, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
This parameter is the binary value that tells you if the file is clean or not. If it's clean, it's 0. If it's infected, it's 1, right?
Okay.
So the integration, the backend should check this value. It's 1, it will block the file and show an error on the front end. If it's 0, the file is clean and it's accepted. And then you obviously get information about each engine the same way you get that information here.
Yeah.
Unlab says the file is clean. Clean. Avira says it's infected. If we go and look at this, Unlab says scan result is 0, so it's clean. Avira says scan result is 1, so it's infected, right? And Avira would also show you the name of the malware the same way it shows it here. So, and at the end, you get the information about, how many engines have scanned the file and the total time in milliseconds.
True.
So what we know now is the file is infected, but it's also been sanitized. So what I want to do now is download the sanitized version of that file. And if we go back to this diagram, so we send the file for scanning, we go to data ID, we look at the result, and now I want to get a copy of the sanitized file.
Yep.
How do I do that? If I go here, download sanitized file, you see still a get method because I want to get something from MetaDefender Core, and the URL is this one. It's slightly different. So MetaDefender Core URL /file/converted and the same data ID. Again, no specific header is requested here. So I still have this data ID here. You see the data ID. This is the one that I was given in the beginning. So let's just copy this. And for data sanitization, again, I'm using a get method. I need to change the endpoint to /file/converted, and I just add my data ID. And what I can do now is send and download. So I can download with Postman this file. And I get a prompt to save the sanitized file. And the sanitized file, it's here. Now, I don't have a Microsoft Office on this VM to open it, but you see it has a new name.
Yeah, that is sanitized.
So if we go back to this one, we send the file, we go to data ID, we looked at the result, we saw there's a sanitized version of it, we asked for the sanitized version of this file. When you ask it, right, I download it on the same machine, but usually they download it in the database.
Yeah.
So that's the entire process.
And how to set the quarantine folder or within the core, or shall I put in a separate path for quarantine? Infected files?
Well, it depends on what the customer wants, right? But usually they keep it on MetaDefender Core.
Correct, okay.
What they can do is they can have a folder here on the backend with infected files. They can also download the infected files here. But they might not want to download the infected files over the network and so on. They just want to keep it here.
Okay. And
if the customer is not using data sanitization, this step would not exist, right? They just send the file and check the scan results.
And receive
if everything is fine, the file, yeah.